speaking of lunacy, Max, let me play one clip of Zelensky. Okay, so this is Zelensky's interview on Sunday with Fareed Zakaria, part of his effort to lobby for these long-range strikes. And listen to how he openly describes his strategy. His basically what his plan for peace is. His plan for peace is basically to make ordinary Russians suffer, and he thinks that will actually help him win the war.
The problem that people have to understand that his mission is not to stop the war. He doesn't want to stop anything.
He's talking about Putin here, says Putin doesn't want to stop the war. Of course, that's undermined by the fact that Russia negotiated with Zelensky's government a peace deal more than 2 years ago, which Zelensky chose to walk away from under U.S. pressure, as Victoria Nuland recently newly confirmed, saying that the U.S. warned him against it because, in her words, it would have left Ukraine neutered. And by that, she meant not being able to have all the weapon systems that Victoria Nuland and other neocons want Ukraine to be flooded with so they can threaten Russia. That, to her, means neutering Ukraine. So to avoid neutering Ukraine by not having it been a hyper-militarized proxy, she was willing to destroy Ukraine and sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people.
He said that at the Munich Security Conference. I think Kamala was there.
She was there, yeah.
2022, which helped precipitate or influence Putin's invasion or special military operation, which was that they should have never signed the Bucharest Agreement. Ukraine should have had nuclear weapons.
And he talked about revisiting that decision, basically saying we might seek to acquire nuclear weapons, which is
how is that not seen as the ravings of a madman? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, and then he goes on to outline a strategy here.
Because he doesn't need and he afraid very much of successful Ukraine. It's not about even victory.
But then how will the war end? Because you're not going to get a total victory, it seems to me. You're not going to drive him out of all of the Donbass and Crimea. He's not going to be able to occupy Kyiv. So there will have to be some compromise.
It's when you're very strong.
Good for Fareed for admitting what was obvious, I don't know, more than 2 years ago. Now he can say that now that everyone's died. But it's where was this argument at the very start? I don't think Fareed Zakaria was making it. But anyway, listen what Zelensky says.
When you're very strong and the other side knows that you're very strong and you're as strong as possible to make influence on his society, not to be very happy with this war because he afraid, again, I repeat it again and again, because I'm sure in it, he afraid only one thing. No leaders, no countries, no nothing. He afraid of his society, Russian people. And if Russian people are in danger, if they don't have comfortable life, if they live without energy like our people, they will understand the price of the war and they will be not happy with it and they will begin to influence on him, on Putin. That's why I said, make Ukraine strong and you will see that he will sit and negotiate.
So that's his genius strategies, make the Russian people suffer. And then in his fantasy, they're going to turn against Putin. But first of all, even putting aside whether that's a legitimate strategy, because it sounds like state terrorism, basically trying to impose suffering on people. But, but one could argue that Russia's done that in Ukraine. They have hit the energy grids, although they've done that, if you look at the trajectory, they do that every time Ukraine escalates. But anyway, putting that aside, look at the capacity of Ukraine to make the Russian people suffer. What is the prospect he can really make that happen? Russia's so much more powerful militarily. It's Russia that can keep inflicting pain on Ukraine. And clearly, the strategy of making Russians suffer and overthrowing Putin or putting pressure on him, that's been the strategy of neocons for years now. How's that going? It was supposed to be the result of sanctions. That's why Biden and Nuland were so giddy when Putin invaded, because they could finally impose all these sanctions that they were dreaming about, salivating over, turning the ruble to rubble, crushing Russia's economy. They were so happy about that. What did that accomplish? Just putting aside the morality. Putin's stronger, his economy. He actually, I think, appreciated it because it forced a lot of elite Russians to put their money back home because they were being squeezed out of financial institutions and circles in the West. So even practically, how is he possibly going to achieve this goal of making the Russian people suffer and turning against Putin. It's insane. But that is the strategy that Zelensky is pursuing, and he's been encouraged in that by people in Washington who have had the same fantasy for years.
Yeah. It's harmed Europe's economy. It's harmed the economy of Western Europe, particularly Germany, which has relied on natural gas from Russia. Hey, it blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. People in Germany I talk to tell me that they just prices are extremely high. They notice their economic fortunes are far worse. You can directly connect it to this. Inflation in the US, this is at least a peripheral factor here. Oil prices going up massively in the US, especially in early 2022. There's an economic blowback effect, and everyone's supposed to bear the brunt in order to save Zelensky's fortunes and to put Russia under threat. And it's a strategy that's being recycled from the Cold War that George Kennan conceived in the NSC on behalf of Harry Truman, the containment strategy of the Soviet Union, the pressure cooker effect, that if the Soviet Union's put under enormous economic pressure and surrounded with military bases, it will create internal strife while forcing the Soviet state to spend more and more on its military and less on social programs, which will then create more discontentment among the citizens. But we're not seeing a state run along the same lines as the Soviet Union. Russian citizens know what the 90s were when they were effectively under US management. They're not going to go back to it. Putin remains popular. It's not working. But in Washington, Zelensky's word, it feels like it's the final word, which is, and I don't know, what the deadline is here, or whether Zelensky will be mollified on these weapons, given something to kind of make him go away.
I mean, or he'll just be mollified by being allowed to go into exile soon and live in whatever villa he has waiting for himself. Like, I think, like, he's a really tragic figure, or just, I don't know if the word is tragic, but it's just pathetic what he's done to his country. For what? Like, he was elected with a lot of hope. Like, people in the east of Ukraine were excited when he won, because he was outside of the normal political establishment. He seemed like an outsider. He was talking about making peace. He had people in a circle who were from the Donbass, who talked about the suffering of the people in the Donbass. He talked about respecting everybody. He talked about how people in Crimea and the Donbass should be allowed to speak Russian, which was like anathema to the coup regime that took power in 2014. So there are all these things to be optimistic about. But what did he end up doing? He ended up just being carrying water for the ultra-nationalists inside his country who don't want to make peace, and for neoconservatives in Washington. And for what? And so now he's just completely lost his grip with reality, it seems to me.
Yeah. Or he was just an actor all along. I mean, it was the Ukrainian people on both sides of the divide who wanted peace, who elevated him to the presidency, and he could not have been elected without the Russian-speaking population, which is no longer part of the Ukrainian electorate.
Yeah.
So he's dependent completely on Washington to keep him in power, and he has to play the part of a kind of Ukrainian nationalist with the Azov battalion's guns to his back.